Hi, good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started literally right now. So welcome to the May CUCSA chat, strategic planning for your staff organization. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to be here and be a part of the conversation. And this is really meant to provide some insights for those of you leading staff organizations when it comes to making long-term plans for their direction. So very excited to welcome CUCSA's strategic plan work group for this year. They've done great work this year and really excited to kind of share those initiatives. So before we do that, you're probably wondering who I am. I'm Dennis McIver, pronouns he, him, his. I'm chair of the Council of UC Staff Assemblies this year. I work out of UC Office of the President's Office of Workplace Inclusion and Belonging, where I'm a program manager for EDIB. I'm also a past president of UCR Staff Assembly and a past chair of the Black Faculty and Staff Association at UCR. So very excited to welcome you to this discussion. So before we get too much into introductions, I did want to read our land acknowledgement, which goes as this. The Council of UC Staff Assemblies recognizes that our service occurs on the unceded territory of the indigenous peoples of California, and that these lands were and continue to be of great importance to them. Every member of our community has and continues to benefit from the use and stewardship of these lands. With respect and gratitude, we acknowledge and make visible our relationship to the original caretakers. We've also placed some links below. They're also on the CUCSA website if you're interested in learning more about the indigenous history of California. We've all been doing Zoom for a while. I know we're familiar with the etiquette thing, but I'm going to say it anyway. This is being recorded for future use. First of all, I encourage you to share this widely if there are folks you think would be interested, or if you just want to pick up information later. We do ask that you leave your microphone recorded during the event. But if you have questions, we would ask that you either type them into chat or use the hand raise function, just so that way we can keep an eye on all of your wonderful insights. So when this group came together, I need to tell you, I was super excited with the work that I've seen them do individually, and I knew it would be magical. And in the time since, I was proven right. So let me talk to you some about these members and come from 3 different locations. We'd start with Ian Cooke, who serves as an academic personnel analyst at UC Merced and is current vice president of UC Merced Staff Assembly. Fun fact, she has a Juris Doctorate, which I think is so cool, and really excited to see what she does next year as president, and welcome. Also wanted to acknowledge Khoban Kochai, who is also a member of the work group, who serves as a director of Anchor Institution Mission and Culture Climate at UC Davis Health. Also is the current chair of UC Davis's Health Staff Assembly, and also is a multi-time UC alum. And so thank you for all your work, Khoban. Similarly, I wanted to acknowledge and thank Lauren McDiarmid, who serves as an internal fellowship analyst for graduate studies at UC Davis and is the hardworking chair of UC Davis's Staff Assembly. And they just successfully had a wonderful Thank Goodness for Staff Week and has contributed a lot to this work. And last and certainly not least is Jeremy Thacker, who serves as the work group chair for the strategic plan work group, currently the assistant director of educational and student success technologies at UC Irvine, also is a past chair of UC Irvine Staff Assembly, and as we've come to know, is a proud UCI alum. And Jeremy, I couldn't help myself. Zot zot.
Zot zot.
So I'm going to stop share, and I'm going to leave it to the work group to present, and the floor is all of yours. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that generous introduction, Dennis. Now that he has called our process magical, I feel like the bar has been set very high. But we're really excited to be here today to share a little bit about our strategic planning process with you. But really, it's just a lens in terms of how we're thinking about it. This is really about how organizations can use strategic plans in order to chart a course for future development, advancement, maturation. So let me, where's the window I need? Let me rearrange things a little bit here off screen. There we go. That's where I need it to be. So for today's chat, we will be talking a bit about sort of the fundamentals of how did CUCSA come to be doing a strategic plan in case it resonates with you and makes sense in your context. talking a bit about what is a strategic plan to begin with, what sorts of things does it include. Then the real meat of this will be kind of stepping through the process that we used. So in each case, we're going to talk a bit about what is the step, what are you doing, why are you doing it, who's involved in it, and then we'll talk about what it looked like for us specifically in CUCSA as a concrete example of how you might do that. At the end, we'll have lessons learned and best practices, things we kind of picked up on the road as we were doing this, and then we'll leave time at the end for questions and answers. With that said, this is a CUCSA chat, so if you have questions along the way, I encourage you to raise your hand in the Zoom chat or type into the text chat, and we'd be happy to kind of answer them as we go when they're relevant. So you're encouraged to do that. So let's get into where this all began for CUCSA. So CUCSA did have a strategic plan in 2018, and actually there was some that came before that, but the 2018 one was set up to last for 3 years. So by 2021, it had expired. There was the chaos of the pandemic, as we all know, which took a lot of attention away from things like strategic planning. But our incoming leadership, and Dennis being chief among them, recognized that it was time for a revamp, time for something that would help us to chart a course in a bigger picture for the Council of UC staff assemblies and figure out how do we continue to grow and evolve our organization beyond the day-to-day advocacy work that's really our main focus when we're in the trenches. So for those who aren't familiar, CUCSA organizes its work by breaking out work groups each year, and a work group of between 4 and maybe 7 people will focus on a topic and then issue a recommendation at the end. So this year, they assembled a work group around the strategic plan, where we've been focusing just on what are the things that CUCSA should be working on, and spend the whole year doing analysis, assembly on this. And we'll actually be working even into the summer on getting things wrapped up. So more on that in just a minute, but Dennis did a fantastic introduction for all of us, so that's covered. Here we are again. I do want to mention, unfortunately, Khoban's out this week, so couldn't join us, but I'm in spirit. We do have Ian and hearing from them. I just want to mention really quick that Ian is having some connectivity issues, so her video isn't on, but she's very much here, and you'll be hearing her voice soon. So what is a strategic plan? According to John Bryson, who is a respected author in this space, a strategic plan is, or strategic planning rather, is a deliberative, disciplined effort to produce fundamental decisions and actions that shape and guide what an organization or other entity is, what it does, and why it does it. And I find those last questions to be particularly interesting because we often think of strategic plans in terms of what we see, say, on our campuses. It's like a list of goals and objectives and measures and things like that. It's an action plan, but really it speaks to something more fundamental than that, and it starts in a more fundamental place. The strategic plan is about who are we? Who do we want to be? What is our purpose? And it's out of those things that the specific goals, objectives, measures, etc., arise. Really, the vast majority of strategic planning is taking that step back from the day-to-day and figuring out who are we and who do we want to be, and that's the vast majority of work. And once you've done that, the action plan kind of naturally emerges from it. So with that in mind, the final strategic plan can have a lot of components. There's a list on the right side of this slide of all the things that might show up in a strategic plan. It really depends on what your organization needs. Not every organization needs all these pieces. This is kind of the omnibus list. And in the case of CUCSA, we are not doing all of these things. We are not revisiting our mission statement, and we're not assembling a list of mandates and things, but we are doing things that we think make sense in our context. So there will be an executive summary, there will be a SWOT analysis, goals and objectives, performance indicators, a vision for the future. So this just gives an idea, though, of the kinds of things that might go into a strategic plan. So it really is much more than just kind of that list of goals. As we started out into this, we had a couple of key resources. One was the previous strategic plan from 2018 that we were able to draw from and see kind of how did we approach this before, what worked and what didn't, and build on that in terms of setting a vision for what the next strategic plan would be. One notable change is that the previous ones tended to be a little bit focused on actual advocacy outcomes, things that CUCSA wanted to push for, whereas the one that we produced is much more operationally oriented. So you'll be seeing that as we continue through, but we'll also be explaining why. And then we have this tremendous book that is my new strategic planning Bible, Creating Your Strategic Plan, 3rd edition. It's a guide that is intended for nonprofit organizations. So for folks like us, it really scales up. So it even works for like massive organizations. I don't know that anyone here would be in the position of having to plan for a group that big. But we found it really useful to help us establish a framework for how to even begin to approach this. From there, we were able to ad-lib a bit, but kind of having that starting framework was hugely helpful. So if this is something you're thinking about taking on for your staff assembly or anything else, I would recommend checking out this book. At the end, I will have a link to it in Amazon.com. All right, so as we go into the actual process of planning, we will go through all of these steps here. So this is just a quick preview, but I want to get into the meat of this. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Ian, who's going to take us into process step 1, the readiness assessment.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. So when we started this process, according to the Bible of the strategic planning book, we needed to do a readiness assessment. And it's really a good idea to make sure that your organization is in a good position to create and benefit from a strategic plan. So basically, what does your organization need to draft and enact a strategic plan? And this encompasses also time and capacity of the work group itself. Laying out timeframes, weekly meetings, capacity to work on these slides and surveys and all of the things that we do during this process. Jeremy came up with this great analogy. So when a readiness assessment is basically like baking a cake, right? So it's a good idea to make sure you have all of your ingredients like flour and the tools and an oven, right, before you get started. So those are some of the things that we kind of discussed and implemented throughout this process. Next slide, please. And so the second part of this, we defined 4 major roles associated with the strategic plan, found assignees for each, and ensured that they understood and were ready to take on those responsibilities. And we recommend 4 roles, but we only used 3 in this process. One role was the Strategic Planning Coordinating Committee, which is meant to be a representative body that helps with feedback, making connections, and buy-in larger organizations. But in small orgs, it's not as relevant, right? All along the way, you should make sure that you're adapting this process to the circumstances and needs, in this case, for CUCSA and its future. The next process, or the next step of this process, is identifying stakeholders. These are the folks who CUCSA partners with, or your organization would partner with, and those folks that are most impacted by the work that you're doing. They help to structure the voice of your organization, in this case, CUCSA. How we identified these stakeholders was quite a process, and it was done by the strategic work group who you've been introduced to today. And we basically started, obviously, with the Bible and the book that Jeremy pointed out earlier, as he refers to it. And we created a Miro board and several Google documents to narrow down those stakeholders that we wanted to interview to gain feedback to start initiating the context of the strategic plan. And for the last step in my slides, we kind of just started this kind of, it piggybacks off of the previous slide, right, on the information gathering, which we pulled after we identified the stakeholders, right? So these are the people that have invaluable insight to, in this specific case, CUCSA, and the future direction based on the current and past experiences with the delegation. And in this instance, we identified several individual groups that we decided to interview. First would be like an alumni delegation, closer to home, our local staff assemblies, and the folks that do have a lot of work and impact with CUCSA. Current and past stars. So stars are the staff advisor to the regents, and they have a lot of insight in process and guidelines on how we can really have our voice heard at the regent level. Also, there are UCO partners, Dennis, and a few of the other folks that we work with, including and not limited to our HR partners, who have been a huge help with this process and and really given some great feedback and information. So the way that we did a lot of our information gathering, where we held several town halls, I know some of you attended those, and we thank you for that. We did individual meetings with our CHROs on our own campuses. And as well, on top of that, we sent out a survey for those folks and gained a lot of feedback, on how what the direction and how they would like to see CUCSA move forward in the future. And we also did group meetings with current and past CUCSA delegates, as well as meeting with our current staff assembly representatives. And those are folks that have a lot of insight to in their specific localities, and things that they'd like to see CUCSA incorporate moving forward in the strategic plan. And that's all from me, and I'll pass it over to Lauren McDiarmid from Davis.
All right, thank you, Ian. So the next step in our strategic plan was the identification of our strategic issues. So now that we had a large amount of fine-grained feedback that ranged from big picture values to extremely specific process adjustments, we met as a strategic planning team in order to establish overarching priorities. And so in order to do that and identify those strategic issues, we gathered the data into a grid, which we'll show you shortly, and did some mapping of our strategic issues. And there should be a focus on kind of topics at this point rather than specific actions to take as you're looking at the themes of the feedback that you got. So next slide. All right, so the identification of the strategic issues, so mapping. So, at this point in time, we had kind of, I think, around 97 needs and issues that were identified through the group, and we were mapping them down into what later becomes 16. And so how we did this is we stepped through the specific needs and suggestions and kind of narrowed them down into higher level strategic issues. When a need or suggestion aligned with one or more, we grouped that issue together. And when a need or suggestion didn't match any other issue, we determined whether it captured something of interest to the organization and we needed to create a new issue, or if it was maybe an outlier and something kind of just to keep in mind later. And in this process, after we worked on mapping, we included our leadership, who are our sponsors in the strategic planning process, to gain their perspective about what's important and what's worth keeping to make sure we captured that for the organization. And in the next slide, we narrowed down those 90-some needs and issues that came from all of the information gathered into 16 distinct strategic issues. This number was a bit high, but it felt as small as we could go without feeling like we were leaving out something potentially important. And it was 16 things we wanted to bring into our next step, which is step 5, and that's prioritization. And so taking these 16 identified strategic issues in consultation with the internal stakeholders, we were able to assess the importance of and impact of each of these issues. And so we did that in kind of 3 different steps. We gathered input from our internal stakeholders. So you'll see here in the toolbox in each step, tools we use to kind of accomplish that step in the process. And so for this, it was the strategic plan priorities survey, and that was sent out into all of our internal stakeholders, which included for us, our current and past CUCSA delegates, as well as our leadership. And so once we did that, we were able to go into step 2 and do some data analysis. For us, we did that through data visualization. That was a critical part in helping us move the data points into an easy to digest overview, because we did have a lot of input from different individuals. And so throughout the prioritization process, our goal in the end of this step was recognizing the member priorities. So by identifying these top objectives, we were able to prepare and move into our strategic formulation step, where later we're going to be defining goals, milestones, and timelines for implementation. So taking a look here, this is a little clip of the survey that we put together. And in this survey, we surveyed for biographical information, so location, affiliation to our organization, and then had folks rank those 16 identified strategic issues. And then we had the opportunity to add additional input as well, which would maybe be something we missed, something highlighted, and that kind of turned into this data visualization dashboard that we were able to do. And so these are two glimpses of just two of the few dashboards there, but you'll see there's filters where you can filter through kind of who it was. So if you did want to take a look at maybe what was important to leadership and past chairs versus those folks that are at local staff assemblies, we were able to do that and kind of dig more into data there. And then you'll see as well with the ranking, we're able to see kind of what was top rank, what the deviation was, so we could see maybe if there was big differences in what certain groups of people felt were more important than others. And so with that, once we kind of had our membership priorities recognized, we moved to step 6, which was our strategy formulation. So this took place with the strategic planning team. Our primary tool for this was our SWOT analysis. CUCSA, having a limited capacity as an organization of primarily volunteers, we wanted to identify the strategic issues that would do the most to propel our organization forward and focus on those in the strategic plan. So in the 3 key steps, we factored environmental conditions into the feedback that we received from our stakeholders and performed SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Then moved to developing a list of top strategic issues to vet with our leadership. So further narrowing down to about 3 to 5 issues that we identified. We wanted to identify a smaller number of issues that we can make a big impact on rather than a broad amount that may not be able to address as thoroughly through the strategic plan. And then kind of once we had that identified, we were able to decide on a structure of the actual written plan and formulated a draft of the strategic plan. So taking a look at our SWOT analysis, we did it using a simple 4-square table in a document. Because we had so much information gathered, this was actually a fairly easy exercise for us, and it only took a 1-hour session. And so then moving from there, we were able to go into the strategic issue recommendations. And so this is a document we created with contributing resources outlined for our leadership, as well as the recommendations and kind of what was behind recommendations. And we spent time with leadership really going and digging through those and getting their feedback. And then that brought us to the last part of our strategy formulation on how to decide the format of our strategic plan. So now we have all this data, our priorities. How are we going to put it in writing in a way that is meaningful? So when we were thinking about that, we were looking at digestibility, measurability, and adaptability. So is it easy to read and understand? Measurability, allowing us to set goalposts and defining success for these, as well as adaptability. Can the plan adapt and change based off the business environment, such as, we're a rotating group of membership. So there's a rotation of leadership along with delegates rotating through. So we wanted this plan to be able to adapt with those that are coming in, along with some changes in staff concerns. I mean, we all know the pandemic came and those staff concerns really drastically changed quickly. And so can our strategic plan, adapt as those priorities in the organization may change. So once we had our format, we were able to define our goals, set objectives by defining our desired outcome, and then begin to set metrics for how we would define the progress towards the objective. And then we set initiatives that would also help reach the metrics. I put a little outline of our draft here, and you'll notice that we have suggested initiatives instead of maybe initiatives, and that was due to the fact of the rotating membership. So we wanted to provide ideas for how folks might do tasks to get to these goals, but didn't want to necessarily set those in stone as it may change. All right, and so process 7, review and revision. All right, so now we have a draft and it is time for more feedback. So you'll notice, I think feedback is in every step of this process through different folks. And so this is kind of where we are currently. It involves our organizational leadership, our membership, as well as our stakeholders. So this is everyone involved in the process up until this point. We bring them back in. We sent out our draft and wanted to make sure we were going in the right direction. So we had a survey that we sent out along with a copy of the draft. And we were asking folks, did we capture the right priorities? Do you feel your input is reflected in this draft? Is there anything that we really missed the mark on or should be changed? Is the way we structured it readable? And would you change anything of the format, layout, wording, etc.? And so once we kind of had sent the draft out and it had been lingering out there for a while, we hosted a town hall and invited everyone that had been involved up until this point, which was a really helpful step for us because we were able to take and provide some context to the group and ask questions based on the feedback we had received so far for the draft. And it really brought fantastic perspective and considerations to areas that needed refinement. And we'll be taking that feedback. This is our next upcoming step on the draft and creating a revised version. And then we'll likely repeat the process, maybe not with the entire group we invited this time, but we'll repeat the review process with leadership and likely internal stakeholders until we kind of come to our final draft. All right, so my last slide here is on adoption of our plan. So securing the formal endorsement to enhance the group buy-in to the strategic plan. I feel like oftentimes, right, we see these strategic plans and they're like, okay, that was a great exercise, and it kind of sits there. And it's really important to us to involve everyone in each step so that there is buy-in and there is action taken through the plan. And so we'll have organizational resolution, formal vote, and straw polls of the strategic plan. And so it means that we can, this can take many forms in your organization. For us, though, it'll be through our final meeting of the year. We'll be presenting on this and get final buy-in. And that's, Jeremy mentioned, we may work into the summer on our year-long process to formalize this as well. And then confident in our product and making sure that it has broad support as we move forward. So with that, I will turn it to Jeremy to wrap us up.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. So as you see in every step of the way, there's a lot of seasoning to taste, and adoption is no different. What adoption looks like is going to be different for every organization. We have an idea of what it looks like for CUCSA, but depending on your group, it could just be a mandate, it could be a formal vote, it could be just about anything. So that brings us to step 9, description of the organization in the future. So this is really about painting a vivid picture of why it is you would want to see through the strategic plan. If you follow these steps, if you fulfill these goals, what place will that take us to, and what does that look like? This may seem even a little bit out of order, like you'd think you'd like start with the vision and then you would develop the plan from that. But again, thank you to the Strategic Planning Bible for this. It really is about figuring out, what is our identity? What are the steps to move things forward? And then once we're agreed about those steps, painting a picture that is something that people can glom onto. You want to be kind of agreed about where it is you're going before you create this. And then this becomes your visionary North Star that motivates people to fulfill the strategic plan and get you there. This optimistic picture of the future. So in our case, we'll be drafting this after our final CUCSA meeting of the year. This will be something that will go into the first meeting of the next year in order to inspire the delegation to fulfill the plan and carry it forward. Step 10, assessment and revision plan. This is our last step, so we're finally at the finish line. 2 pieces here, the first being assessment, which is really all about are we done yet? How far along are we? How well you're able to do this will depend a little bit on how the plan was structured. Ideally, your plan recommends quantifiable measures and quantitative outcomes. And what I mean by that is it should be clear whether or not something is complete or how far along you are on something. If you ask the question, is this complete of a goal or objective in the strategic plan, the answer should always be yes or no and not kind of. And so part of that is design going in, but then part of it is actually going through the assessment process to make sure that you're following through on that and regularly revisiting to actually answer that question. Ideally, a person or a committee is responsible for that tracking. So in our case, we'll be working with leadership going into next year to figure out who will be accountable for these things. And ideally, you also want the follow-up on that to be regular and transparent. So something like a quarterly update or a monthly newsletter or whatever it is, but something that keeps it visible and at front of mind so people can see, are we making progress? Celebrate the progress that we are making and also be aware of what next steps are or what we still need to do. Lastly, the revision plan, which is that every strategic plan lasts for usually a few years. How long will depend on your group and what you decide makes sense in your context. But by default, they have a shelf life. So how long is your plan designed to last? At the end of that, you should probably be looking at starting to design a new one. That said, things can change along the way. So in addition to like checking in at the end of your plan's lifespan, you should really be checking in along the way to say, is this still relevant? Does this still make sense? Be adaptable to changing circumstances and changing course if you need to. So something like revisiting it every year. You probably don't need to do it every quarter like status updates, but at least once a year saying, is this still the right plan for us? How is our progress? Does it make sense to continue with this plan? Do we need to pick up something else or do we need to divert our attention somewhere else? So being thoughtful about that so that if you do need to change course, it is a well thought out decision and something that's done strategically rather than just kind of allowing the plan to fade, which isn't quite as helpful or strategically sound. All right, so thank you for going on that journey with us. And we're still on it ourselves. Again, we'll be wrapping up in the summer. But just from what we've done so far, we have picked up some words of wisdom that we'd like to share with you, or things that we thought were really valuable and might be able to help you if you embark on creating a strategic plan. So the first was that data gathering and review with stakeholders is extremely time consuming. And I mean this, we spent at least half of our entire year just identifying, wrangling, spending time with, synthesizing feedback from stakeholder groups. It was a massive investment, but I would happily do it again. And that's because all that upfront effort made everything since then so much faster and easier. Going in, I was worried about how are we going to figure out what the strategies are? How are we going to do a SWOT assessment? How long is that going to take? And it turned out that by gathering all of this really rich information, going in, we had such a strong sense of what our organization wanted, what our stakeholders wanted, that these documents almost kind of wrote themselves. So putting in that effort really is worth it. And it helps to ensure that the strategic plan that you get really is a representative document that serves everyone, which leads me into the next point. Looking to partners beyond the organization is essential. We are in the business of serving others, as most nonprofits are, staff assemblies, CUCSA, whatever advocacy groups you might be working on your campuses or in the community. Unless it is a social club, chances are your success will be measured by the impact that you have on others, folks outside the group. If you really want to make a difference, you have to understand what those people want, what those people need, what those people are interested in from your group. And your ability to meet those needs, your ability to speak to those things and make a difference for them will ultimately be the things by which your group's success and effectiveness are measured. So it makes sense when you're building your strategic plan that you really focus on those outside people to understand them and to make sure that you're speaking to them through whatever your maturation process is. Lastly, when seeking feedback on priorities, try to make options as distinct and few as possible. So this goes back to that list of 16 priorities we showed you where we thought, oh, this is too hard. We can't trim it down any further without losing valuable content. We got feedback after that 16 was still it was too many. It's too hard to prioritize among them. There's too much overlap. So if we had it to do again, I think we might have pushed even harder to really try to trim them down and make them as distinct as possible, which might even mean making some decisions on the behalf of the group about what should or shouldn't be included in the plan. But I think that the clarity that your group would get in terms of what they're deciding between how the things are differentiated from each other would lead to more valuable conversations. And as long as you're still having that feedback loop, there's still an opportunity for some things to make their way back in. All right, so that is the last of our prepared content. So from there, we're happy to take any questions that folks have about any part of this process or about how you might go about getting started. Feel free to drop something in the chat, or even better, raise your hand, because again, this is a CUCSA chat. So let's keep it interactive if we can.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy, Lauren, Ian, for presenting that and for your work. I just wanted to add one quick thing and one point. First is I wanted to thank this group because they were all in from the beginning and they really dived in with this. And this is hard, brain tickling work, but they just took full advantage of it. And I want to spotlight Jeremy's leadership on it because he talked from a year out saying, this is the stuff I'm really into. And, you know, we had the conversation and I said, okay, let's see what happens. And he's just shown a level of intentionality and inclusion that I think has really informed the work so much. So I did want to make sure I elevate and spotlight him in his leadership. One point I would quickly make, having watched it from the perspective, is the benefit of having this happen in parallel with the work we did this year is that a lot of what they talked about, I found validated some of the ideas that we've been doing the last couple of years, along with where I think we're heading as an organization. So in some ways, it kind of affirms it from a leadership perspective, seeing their work affirmed a lot of what we did. So that was a really cool aspect of it too. But really good presentation. I appreciate y'all so much. And it was magic. I will stand on that to the end. But at this point, if anyone has any questions, happy to see. I've got one, but I'm going to be quiet first.
We'll kind of let the silence hang. And thank you so much, Dennis. That's such a generous compliment, but it was a group effort through and through. I think that the real take home here is that it really does take a community to undertake something like this. And unless you're really engaging with the people in your organization, you're not going to have a representative plan and you're not going to have the buy-in necessary to make it successful on the long run. So really, inclusion is the key thing.
Well, one quick question I'll throw in then to start any ideas is, I like looking at it also from the personal development standpoint. And I was wondering if as a work group, you could describe how this process has impacted your growth as professionals. And because it is a unique set of skills that not everyone always gets a chance to do. So I was wondering if you took any of that and applied it in terms of your sort of day-to-day job when you're not being the superheroes that you are.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to punt to my team members on this one.
Yeah, I can. So my day job, I do academic personnel. So I do the recruitment for one of the schools here on campus for the new faculty. And really, the identification of stakeholders and information gathering has made a huge difference on the kind of the way that I view my setup, right, for the beginning of recruitment season. So identifying those folks that, you know, I need to work with, you know, setting out, you know, surveys and information so that everyone is on the same page and that we kind of work through those things as a team, as opposed to like me just kind of doing the work on my own. So I've really found that to be super helpful. And the readiness assessment too, right? I've been redoing all my how-to documents. So someone, if, you know, gosh forbid, I, you know, fall off the face of the earth, someone can just step into my position and really understand like how to from beginning to end and the things that they need to do. So, and really just being able to put that time and understand the capacity that it takes to fulfill the role that I, you know, that I do here on campus.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, you know, this process has really made me appreciate the depth and breadth of the UC system. I think every time we thought we had identified all of our stakeholder groups, we added one to it, like several times throughout the process, and, you know, really saw the big picture of what it takes and what it means to be like University of California. And so that was pretty inspiring as well. And, to keep in mind as you develop things for your job, sometimes I feel like we feel siloed often in your campus or maybe in your departments, but really just like the reaching out and the willingness to of everyone to contribute, and like how wildly varying different perspectives brought things in, I think was a big learning point for me as I developed the strategic plan.
Yeah, so I would add that, at least for me, I think as an institution, we talk a big game about inclusion, and I think with the best of intentions. I do it all the time, I know, in my own work. But this particular project really hammered home how hard it is to really, truly include people, to be thoughtful about your stakeholders, to do outreach, to meet them where they are. Wrangling people on this was so hard, but it paid such dividends later. It is worth it, not just because it's the right thing to do, but actually it also ends up providing so much value in the finished product. So I think it was just, for me, a really tangible example of like why it is so important to do that work and to keep it at front of mind, even when there are so many other things going on.
Thank y'all for all of that. And I see one question that I've received in in the direct chat and private chat, and the question is this going to be available? I think that the answer is yes. We've got it recorded, so this will all be up. So
this question is almost like a plant because it tees up our next slide beautifully. I'm dropping the link to the presentation in the Zoom chat, so you don't have to type that thing that's showing up on your screen right now. So if you click that link, that will take you to a view-only version of this exact slide presentation that I'm in right now. And there's some other useful links at the end. So we do have a link to this book on Amazon.com. This is not a plug for Amazon.com. Feel free to buy it anywhere, but that just gives you a way to find it. And then anyone on our work group would be more than happy to consult, answer questions, whatever else around this kind of work for your organization. So if this is something you're thinking about taking on, we think it's important to stand on the shoulders of those who came before. You don't need to start completely from scratch. Reach out. We would love to help you get started.
I would just like to say, sorry, I don't do the hand stuff.
No worries, Joyce, go ahead.
One of the most important takeaways that I got from this is that it's not about me or, my wants. It's a group effort. And if we keep that in mind, and that it is our focus is the community. And I think that's why you all were probably so successful, because it just wasn't about one person saying, this is what I want. It was a collaboration of ideas, and the focus was the community, the faculty, and not so much of the group.
Yeah.
So this is good.
Thank you so much for that, Joyce. And I would mention something that wasn't as much in the presentation, but that we did that I think contributed to our success thus far was we did, to a degree, make the focus the organization's operations. So when you get to see the product that comes out of this, if you haven't yet, and it'll be published after the final meeting in June, it's really focused on how do we conduct ourselves as an org to take our maturation to the next level? What kind of practices do we need in place? What kinds of partnerships do we need to have? As opposed to what kinds of advocacy issues should we be driving for? Because our thinking is that by focusing on how our organization operates, we are in a better position to approach whatever the advocacy needs of the day are, because they will naturally change. Things are going to come up. People have different perspectives about what's important, rightly or wrongly, but that's always going to shift. So how can we make sure that we have a more adaptable, responsive organization by establishing these relationships, by changing our work style? And that, I think, made it a lot easier to identify what are non-controversial, community-oriented things that we could be doing, things that people could get on board with, and that would ultimately then support the harder to nail down, kinds of policy issues and things that tend to be harder to get strong agreement around.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I see there's
one more thing. I'm sorry. I also noticed that people want to see you walk what you talk. They want to see that, and that's real important. And sometimes we forget that so many times we put stuff out there, but are we practicing it ourselves within our group? And I think that's real important too, to remember that we're being watched. Everything we put out there, people want to see if we're doing it.
So true.
And
Thank you,
I'm going to
Joyce.
be quiet like Dennis.
Thank you, Joyce. So there is a question in there on how we really obtain and persuade people to voice their concerns. And I in my slides, I don't think I did mention that the feedback survey on the draft was anonymous. And so a few pieces of our process, the survey was anonymous. So that way folks could really give their feedback, honest feedback to us. I also think, right, we had them maybe do identifiers more broadly, but every time we met with a group or held a town hall, we established guidelines to at the beginning of the meeting, and maybe something we can add into an additional slide or something of what those guidelines look like. But we did let people know, you know, as we speak, we're never going to single out who said what. We may attribute it to local staff assemblies felt, right? Instead of saying maybe even like UC Davis felt this way, right? So that was a guideline we gave before we ever started a town hall session. And so that way people could have those open conversations without necessarily feeling like they were going to be singled out or criticized for the concerns that they shared.
And I had a direct question come in. How do you really obtain and persuade? Oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry. It just scrolled down on me. On collecting data in order to better serve the information that supports a group purpose, how is it possible to get data that requires leadership approval? And I know we didn't really touch on this too much. And we didn't really come across this issue, but I was wondering if my team might have some, clarification or some opinions on maybe how we could do that in the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. We did not, encounter that issue, but so much of that's because we were very focused on opinion. And we allowed our stakeholders to drive the kinds of things we focused on. When it comes to actual data, I think that actual data in some cases might be useful for, like, say, the SWOT analysis. You want to be taking into account environmental factors, and there might be objective data out there that informs those factors. But at least for us, that wasn't a make or break. I do know, one of the things that we came out with a recommendation on is to do more around data gathering and brokering. So something like that could be an outcome, say, in the plan. But at least for us, I don't feel like the need for especially sensitive information really came up. It was really more about what are the needs and desires of the people we serve, and that was the driving factor.
Thanks, Jeremy.
So something I've learned is even if you're providing it, don't get in the way of people's lunch. So on that note, I'm going to close off the questions and thank Jeremy, Lauren, and Ian for their wonderful work, and thank them as well as Khoban for all of their effort. I know I've called y'all magicians and superheroes, and now I'm going to add rock stars. So power of 3. Anyway, to close things out, because y'all know that if you come to these things enough, I'm a promotion machine. I'm put a couple of things into chat, and to do a quick share screen to close things out, just wanted to talk about a couple of things coming up for CUCSA. So you should be able to see that. On June 14th, we will be having our final quarterly town hall for the year. You'll have a chance to hear what we've been up to, and also all of our work groups will be able to present on their outcomes from the year. So it's just a chance to learn about all the stuff CUCSA's broadly been up to. You absolutely are welcome to register right now. I hope you will, and that you'll spread the word. In July, we will be presenting before the UC Board of Regents, the executive board, which would consist of myself, John Bodenschatz from UC Irvine, and Jim Bowser from UC Santa Barbara, and broadly talking about our work for the year. We'll have more details once things are confirmed, but we'll also be sharing that. But the last event, the last CUCSA chat for the year will be the exit interview, and similar to our mid-year check-in with AMP and the staff advisor, it'll be another way that we kind of close out the system level efforts for the year. I hope that you all will find opportunities to participate and join in that. And it'll just be a good way to talk about the work that's been done by staff and for staff this year. So I hope you'll join and share the word as well. And to close things out, as always, if you're interested in knowing what CUCSA is up to at any time, I encourage you to check out our website, our social media, newsletter. Hey, basically, there's every possible way that you want to connect with us. There's something there. So I hope that you'll find that opportunity to connect and see what we're up to. And so on that note, I will thank you very much for participating, give you 4 minutes back to enjoy your lunch. And thank you for taking the time to learn about this. It's very important. This will be on YouTube for future viewing, and I hope you'll check it out and share it. But in the meantime, everyone, have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful rest of the week. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dennis.